lots of conversations around Ace Magashule in the last little while. Two major resolutions coming out of that ANC National Executive Committee meeting that finally wrapped last night. The President, Cyril Ramaphosa, speaking as leader of the ANC, speaking on behalf of the NEC last night, saying that ANC leaders who face criminal charges must step aside within the next 30 days or face suspension. The most high-profile ANC leader currently facing criminal charges, of course, is the Secretary-General, Ace Magashule, who is accused of corruption in the Free State asbestos roof case. Ramaphosa, again speaking on behalf of the NEC, also said that people are not allowed to work with organizations referred to as the RET forces, or the Radical Economic Transformation Forces. We're joined now by Dr. Collette Schulz-Herzenberg, a senior lecturer in the Political Science Department at the University of Stellenbosch. Dr. Schulz-Herzenberg, thanks very much indeed for your time. We've seen disputes within the ANC before. It appears that there's a dispute happening within the ANC now. When this happens, does this lead to a change in voter behavior?
Well, it's true to say that in previous elections, we have seen splinters from the ANC mother body actually creating some stimulus and some demand in the electorate. You'll recall in 2009, COPE had some success at around 6% of the vote share. And then, of course, we saw the EFF later in the 2014 election, indeed pulling in around 6-7% of the vote share. So I would understand that the ANC might be concerned if the RET faction had to morph and evolve into a political movement that would contest an election. But I personally don't think that they pose as much of a threat as we may initially assume they would. And there are a number of reasons for that. I think that, first of all, the ideological space that the RET, the Radical Economic Transformation Movement, might want to project in terms of policy and ideology has in fact been taken in South Africa by, of course, the EFF. The Economic Freedom Front, Freedom Fighters, have put together a very clear platform that speaks to radical economic transformation. And I think the RET movement would have to articulate something different. That would be quite difficult. I think that they would end up contesting for the same ideological voter space. And of course, it begs the question as to whether voters haven't already moved across into that space towards the EFF. And then, of course, apart from the economic freedom fighters posing a threat to any future RET movement, it may also transpire that, in fact, a splinter at this point within the ANC works well for the ANC mother body. And I say that because we have seen the ANC shedding votes over the last few elections. And much of the public opinion data suggests that's because people have become increasingly disgruntled. We saw some support going to the ANC in the 2019 election, not because the brand itself, the party brand, is necessarily still attracting voters, but because voters threw their weight behind Ramaphosa and his reformist agenda. Now, if we have a split where the RET faction move away from the ANC larger body, it may actually work to the ANC's advantage by pulling voters back who in fact want to secure and put their support back towards the ANC for having shown some success at sorting out issues of corruption and reforming state institutions and so on. So in fact, that may be a reward incentive for voters to come back to the ANC.
In other words, I mean, it goes back to one of the big debates ahead of the 2019 elections was where some people who hadn't really voted for the ANC before, or maybe hadn't for 10 years, going to vote for the ANC because of its leader. It's a situation where the leader, in some cases, depending on some opinion polls, is actually more popular than the party.
Indeed. And I think that was certainly a phenomenon in 2019. And I would argue that Ramaphosa certainly helped the ANC gain its victory. It was quite clear that the party brand was in significant trouble. Voters had been moving away from the party for several elections. And in fact, Ramaphosa was able to push a reformist agenda. So there we have voters doing something somewhat differently to what they'd done in past South African elections, really evaluating the candidate, the top candidate of the party, and placing the integrity of that particular leader, that particular candidate, over and above the party's performance. And I think that was a change in the sort of voter rationale, the voter calculus for the first time. And I don't expect that will go away. I think Ramaphosa needs this for the ANC, in fact. If he's going to win future elections on the back of good performance and a good track record, he needs to be seen to be cleaning up the party as well as state institutions. And it may well help him and the party itself if we see the splinter.
We have what looks like sort of contestation in the ANC, I suppose I should put in brackets again. We have the strong comments of the EFF. We have a situation in the Democratic Alliance quite difficult to sometimes sort of predict what that is going to mean. Then we have, excuse me, the COVID-19 pandemic. All of this together, I presume, makes it actually quite difficult to predict what will happen in the local elections or even in the national elections in 2024.
That is all true, and I would agree, Stephen. And I think as we go into the next municipal local government elections later this year, it's going to be interesting to see to what extent the pandemic affects, number one, turnout, whether people actually choose to go to the polls or not. And we've seen in elections around the world, almost half of the elections around the world that have been held since the COVID pandemic started have actually experienced declining turnout. But of course, that's a characteristic of our elections already, and it's going to be quite difficult to disentangle whether COVID's responsible for further declines in turnout or whether, in fact, we're just continuing with the trend that we've already started. On the other hand, COVID may also impact on the way we are evaluating political parties, and particularly the incumbent party. I think the vaccine program is going to be central to our evaluations of government's ability and competency in terms of handling this pandemic. But again, that is all up for grabs, and it's really in the hands of government in terms of how they want to use this pandemic, or not, as the case may be, to campaign a message of sensible and good governance. So I think it's important that we're going to have to separate the impact of COVID, the actual pandemic itself, away from the other major political factors that are playing out in South Africa today. But having said that, turnout is on the decline. This is largely, I would imagine, because voters tend to struggle to find alternative political homes. And if there is a sort of a turnaround on the political party landscape with some new political parties, but also perhaps a rejuvenated ANC that's able to show its mettle for the first time in a long time, we may see a little bit of resurgence in turnout in 2021.
Fascinating. Dr. Collette Schulz-Herzenberg, Senior Lecturer in the Department of Political Science at the University of Stellenbosch. Thanks very much indeed.